Welcome to Narrative Nights. Step into a world of mystery, intrigue, and suspense. At Narrative Nights, we bring you thrilling detective stories that will challenge your mind and keep you guessing until the very end. Before we begin, we'd love to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Drop a comment and let us know which part of the globe you're watching from. We're all united by the love of a good mystery. Let the investigation begin.
The Deadly Kindness. Chapter 1. Cast On. The low, pearly light of an October evening was retreating from St. Mary Mead when Miss Jane Marple, armed with her familiar, well-worn knitting bag, made her measured way along the lane to the village institute. The air held a decided chill, carrying the crisp, earthy scent of bonfires and the promise of a long winter, causing her to draw her favorite grey cardigan a fraction closer. This modest edifice of red brick was, she reflected, the unassuming stage for many a small drama, and perhaps, tonight, a rather larger one. Through the tall, leaded windows, the warm, indiscriminate glow of electric light spilled out, illuminating the silhouette of the women already gathered. The monthly meeting of the St. Mary Mead Knitting Club was a fixture, yet tonight was freighted with extra significance. A major charity drive was underway, and the much-anticipated A Mystery Skein swap had brought out every serious needlewoman. "Good evening, Miss Marple," a voice cut across the silence, a voice as sharp and starched as a newly laundered apron. Beatrice Morton, the club's indomitable chairwoman, stood sentinel at the door, her clipboard clutched like a weapon and her grey hair pinned back with severe, almost military precision. "Punctuality, as ever. Do come in. We are on the very cusp of beginning." Miss Marple offered a gentle smile and stepped inside. The hall was a pleasing muddle of scents, the clean polish of the floor, the comforting aroma of lanolin from the wool, and the faint, steamy undertone of the tea arrangements already being marshalled at the far end. A comfortable dozen or so women were dispersed among the long, trestle tables, their various works in progress, shawls, blankets, jumpers, spread out in neat, highly organized fashion. She chose a vacant seat beside Mabel Finch, the ample and perpetually cheerful proprietor of the village's only decent wool shop. Mabel was already intensely occupied, her plump fingers flying over a complex, diamond-shaped cable pattern, while a large, overflowing canvas bag of supplies rested beside her chair. "Oh, Miss Marple, I saved you a spot," Mabel chirped, holding up a beautiful, sapphire blue skein. "Such a weight! From the Outer Hebrides, no less. You must feel the softness. It would make the most exquisite jacket for a godchild, wouldn't it? And such a reasonable price, considering the provenance." "Indeed, Mabel." "Truly lovely," Miss Marple acknowledged, extracting her own bag and the small, white wool she intended for the church box. "Little vests and booties are always in demand. Simplicity is key for charity work, don't you find? No need for anything so distracting as a cable." Her delicate fingers, however, were already registering the tension in the room, a tightness that had nothing to do with knitting gauge. Her gaze drifted past the familiar faces. Near the window, she observed the slight, almost rigid figure of Hazel Trent, a newcomer to the village and, consequently, to the club. Hazel, usually so composed in her quiet intelligence, seemed stiff, bent low over an intricate piece of lace. She was wearing a rather smart little suit that looked out of place against the homespun practicality of the other members. Miss Marple filed the observation away. Unease in a new face often signals a secret, just as a slipped stitch can undo a whole garment. Ladies! Ladies! Beatrice's ruler cracked against the table edge. If we might have silence. We are to commence. She paused, surveying her domain. Tonight, we combine fellowship with duty. Our charity collection is paramount, of course, but before that, the mystery skein swap. A ripple of low-key excitement ran through the room. Hester Vale, the gentle, rather flustered woman overseeing the refreshments, smiled broadly from her post by the enormous silver urn. At the last table sat Edith Pike, an elderly widow known for her silent concentration and flawless technique. Edith's hands remained perfectly still as she waited. A reminder, Beatrice's voice hardened slightly, that the mystery skein is a test of skill, not luck. I require a 20-row tension swatch from every participant. I shall check each one personally for gauge and evenness. Slovenliness is simply unacceptable. Lucy Daring, the youngest member and a proponent of the more modern craft of crochet, visibly wilted, fiddling with her hook. Miss Marple noted the young girl's anxiety with a familiar pang. Beatrice's pursuit of perfection was commendable, but her manner often crushed the spirit, much like a faulty washing machine, Miss Marple mused, mangling the clothes rather than merely cleaning them. Through the institute wall, the faint but distinct sound of male voices rose, a burst of competitive laughter, followed by the solid thud of a dart hitting the board in the adjoining room. The men's darts club, with Inspector Slack occasionally amongst them, was in full swing. The mystery packages are numbered, Beatrice continued, indicating a huge wicker basket overflowing with identical brown paper bundles, tied with common string. Draw your number first, then collect your corresponding package. The pleasure, of course, is in the anticipation. No peeking. The drawing commenced. Miss Marple reached into the small cloth bag and drew out number 12. The package she collected felt substantial and pleasingly soft. A slight hiccup occurred moments later. Number 7, cried Lucy Daring, looking relieved. 7, said Edith Pike, peering at her own paper. Oh, dear. I have number 3. There was a minor, momentary panic as the slips were cross-referenced. Beatrice, deeply annoyed by the breach of system, tapped her ruler furiously. A muddle. Most unprofessional. Lucy, you retain number 7. The system, Mrs. Pike, must be adhered to. I shall have to inspect these baskets later. Miss Marple merely noted the small error. A system, however perfect, is only as good as the hand that executes it. The arrival of Lady Bantry, sweeping in with her usual dramatic flair, and a tale of a particularly catastrophic attempt to plant hybrid tea roses, provided a much-needed distraction. The Reverend and Mrs. Clement also slipped in, offering their customary gentle blessings and inquiries about the health of various parishioners. Finally, Beatrice declared, her voice tightening once more, I must confirm, Mrs. Vale, that there are absolutely no nuts in the refreshments. No almonds, no hazelnuts, no peanuts. You know my severe affliction. Hester Vale practically jumped to attention. Oh, I was painstakingly careful, Mrs. Morton. I used a specially marked, nut-free butter, and I checked every ingredient on the scones. I even put up a little sign." She indicated a handwritten card beside the milk jug. Miss Marple observed the exchange. Everyone knew of Beatrice's dangerous allergy. The caution was extreme, but sensible. Yet, the emphasis felt almost performative tonight, as if Beatrice were not merely reminding, but issuing a final, severe warning. The parcels were finally opened. A chorus of oohs and ahs rose as silks, linens, mohairs, and every hue imaginable were revealed. "Oh, a linen blend," exclaimed Lucy, holding up a natural-coloured skein. "But it's so stiff. Does anyone know a trick for softening linen?" "The internet is full of home remedies," Hazel Trent said, without looking up from her own yarn. Her tone was dismissive. One must, however, exercise some discretion before following amateur advice. Miss Marple unwrapped her beautiful soft wool, a delicate, pale rose pink. It was perfect. As she began to cast on her required 20 stitches, the room settled into a productive hush. Needles clicked, the tea urn hissed softly, and the gentle current of village gossip flowed and ebbed. Beatrice circulated, the ruler an insistent, critical presence, checking tension and offering pointed suggestions. It was, Miss Marple concluded, a picture of perfect, ordinary village life. Every thread in its place, every pattern accounted for. It was, she thought, exactly the sort of quiet, predictable evening where a tiny, unforeseen knot might suddenly appear, threatening to unravel the entire fabric. And how terribly wrong that contented assessment would prove to be. Chapter 2: Nut-Free Tea. The Institute clock had just chimed the half-hour past 8 when Beatrice Morton, grasping her inevitable ruler, rose from her seat. She surveyed the tables with a meticulous satisfaction, noting the varying lengths of stockinette and garter stitch that testified to her members' diligence. "Ladies," she announced, her voice possessing a distinct, cutting authority. "Refreshments now seem appropriate. But before we so much as touch a scone, I feel the need to re-emphasize the importance of our strictly nut-free policy tonight." She proceeded directly toward the tea arrangements where Hester Vale, her cheeks flushed from the heat of the urn, was attending to the details. The scones were perfectly arranged, a buttery, pale gold bulwark, flanked by dishes of homemade jam and fresh butter. "I do not wish to be tedious," Beatrice continued, pinning Hester with a gaze that allowed for no evasion, "but as is well known, even the faintest trace of a nut can be catastrophic for me. I must have your absolute assurance, Hester, that every precaution was taken." Hester's face deepened to the color of her strawberry jam. "Mrs. Morton, please. I have been excessively careful. Every single ingredient was checked, the butter is clearly labeled nut-free, the jam is my own preserve, and the flour came from a mill that certifies its machinery. I even used my own wooden spoon, washed expressly, to avoid any contamination." She gestured nervously to her small, carefully printed sign that stood guard beside the milk. Miss Marple, whose needles had paused mid-stitch, watched the exchange. She understood the severity of the allergy, remembering the dreadful panic at the fete years ago. An allergy, she reflected, was like a deep-seated suspicion, entirely reasonable, yet prone to generating disproportionate fear. "Very well," Beatrice conceded, the tension easing slightly from her jaw. "But let us be mindful of cross-contamination. Use the communal servers, not your personal cutlery." The knitters began to stretch, their chairs scraping back on the polished floor. Miss Marple collected her work, her pink swatch nearly complete. As she passed Lucy Daring, the young girl was still worrying at her stiff linen yarn. "This is terribly unyielding," Lucy murmured, rubbing the fibre between her fingers. "I read online that plant fibres can be treated with a little oil to soften them, but I dare not try," with Mrs. Morton inspecting the gauge so closely. "The Internet," Miss Marple smiled gently. "Such a source of both wisdom and sheer nonsense. Perhaps, dear, stick to hot water and patience for now." At the tea table, the familiar social machinery was churning. Lady Bantry was delivering a theatrical account of a domestic crisis, and Mrs. Clement offered soothing, vague interjections. Mabel Finch efficiently poured tea, her energy undiminished, drawing attention to a small collection of shop samples, bamboo needle conditioners, on a nearby side table. "Mabel, those needle oils again," Beatrice noted, accepting her scone. "You are thoughtful to share. They do stop that dreadful squeak." "Just a kindness," Mabel replied, indicating a small, squat brown bottle. "Samples from the Traveller. They are immensely popular with the serious knitters." Miss Marple accepted her cup and scone. Everything appeared immaculate. The tension, however, had not quite dissipated. Just as she resettled herself, Beatrice spoke again, her tone shifting to one of cold, formal business. "Before we become too comfortable, I must inform the club that I shall be presenting a detailed accounting of the yarn fund at our next meeting." The air instantly froze. A palpable sense of dread settled over the room, and all eyes, Miss Marple noticed, swiveled towards Mabel Finch. Mabel's perpetual cheerfulness fractured, just for an instant. "An accounting?" Mabel questioned, her voice unnaturally bright. "But, Beatrice, surely that is unnecessary? All the receipts are in perfect order. Everyone knows how scrupulous I am with the purchases." "I am certain of it," Beatrice replied smoothly, taking a measured bite of scone. "But proper procedure demands regular review." "Nothing personal, Mabel. Just protocol." She picked up her knitting. Her grey wool swatch was coming along beautifully. Miss Marple watched her resume the rapid click of her bamboo needles, noticing the unconscious habit of wetting the end of the yarn with her tongue before tightening a new row, a small, natural gesture common to experienced knitters. A few minutes later, the conversation was tentatively resuming when Beatrice cleared her throat. She did it again, louder this time, rubbing her neck with a troubled expression. "Excuse me," she murmured, her voice becoming thick, "I seem to have a dreadful tickle." She tried to continue, but her breathing suddenly grew audibly labored. The normal, pale pink of her cheeks began to deepen to an alarming shade. "Mrs. Morton!" Hester cried out, her voice high and frantic. "You look dreadfully flushed." Beatrice dropped her knitting and pressed both hands to her throat. She gasped, the sound harsh and frightening. I can't. Something's wrong. I can't breathe." Panic seized the room. Lady Bantry shrieked. Mrs. Clement rushed forward, but hesitation, the fear of a deadly contagion, held the others back. "It's the allergy," Mabel wailed. "Fetch Dr. Haydock, now." Miss Marple moved instantly, not rushing, but with an economy of motion that spoke of long-practiced calm. Beatrice was swaying, her face red and swiftly swelling, her eyes streaming. "The scones!" Hester cried, pointing a trembling finger. "It must have been the scones. But I was so careful." Lucy Daring had fled to the next room, screaming for the doctor and Inspector Slack. The noise of masculine chaos, running feet and deep voices, began to approach. Dr. Haydock arrived, bag in hand, his face grave, but he was too late. By the time he reached her, Beatrice Morton had crumpled to the polished floor of the Institute, a terrifying, silent figure whose breath was barely a flicker. The room, now still save for the doctor's frantic activity, carried a new smell, not the comforting wool, nor the polish, but a faint, slightly roasted, sweet scent, sickeningly out of place. Miss Marple's eyes, clear and sharp as glass, travelled past the scene of collapse. They settled on the abandoned, gleaming bamboo needles lying beside the grey swatch. In the uncompromising glare of the electric light, she saw it. The tips of the needles appeared unnaturally slick, as though they had been lightly touched with some kind of pale oil or grease. A detail, she knew, that pointed not to the tea, but to the very hands of the knitter herself. Chapter 3: Grease on Bamboo. A chilling stillness had fallen over the Institute Hall, a silence far more profound than the usual quiet of concentration. Dr. Haydock had ceased his efforts. Beatrice Morton lay still, covered by a knitted shawl, a poignant piece of domesticity draped over an absolute tragedy. Inspector Slack, his face granite hard, directed the initial proceedings, the official business of sudden death intruding upon the world of wool and patterns. "No one is to disturb anything," Slack commanded, his voice heavy with the authority of the law. "This room is sealed. We must ascertain the source of the poison." The women huddled together, a picture of profound, horrified shock. Hester Vale, still plagued by guilt, was now weeping quietly, insisting to Lady Bantry, "I checked every tin. Every label." Miss Marple, moving with a deceptive fragility, had edged closer to the main table. Her eyes, however, were not on the victim, but on the items immediately surrounding her. "Inspector," she murmured, drawing his attention away from his notebook. "Before you focus solely on the tea table, might I draw your attention to Mrs. Morton's knitting? Her materials seem unnaturally prepared." Slack looked at her, his expression a mixture of fatigue and habitual skepticism. "Unnatural how, Miss Marple?" "We have a clear case of anaphylactic shock. The source must be ingestible." "Look closely at the bamboo tips of her circular needles," she suggested. "They possess an odd, persistent gloss, as if they have been freshly treated with something greasy." Slack knelt beside the table. Under the harsh scrutiny of the electric light, the smooth, pale bamboo surface indeed showed a distinct, oily film, catching the light in a way that bamboo, a naturally dry wood, ought not to. "You're right," he conceded slowly. "There's a residue. But surely a needle conditioner is harmless. It cannot possibly be the cause." Miss Marple leaned nearer, her senses acute. From the needles, a faint, sweet, roasted aroma rose, a smell wholly foreign to the natural lanolin and polish of the hall. "Observe the metal ferrule, Inspector," she instructed, indicating the joint where the needle met the cable. "There is a small, perfect amber droplet resting there." "An oil." Slack, using his handkerchief, carefully collected the droplet, transferring it to his notebook paper where it created an expanding, greasy ring. "It's certainly oil," he confirmed, "but without a laboratory, we are no wiser as to its nature." Miss Marple's attention shifted to the display of wares still sitting on the side table. Mabel Finch was kind enough to bring samples of needle conditioner L this evening. "We should secure that bottle." Slack retrieved the squat, brown vessel, noting the oily trace on the cap. When questioned, Mabel, tearful and tremulous, confirmed the contents. "The traveling man assured me the L stood for lanolin. Just a conditioning oil to prevent squeaking. Harmless." Miss Marple then directed Slack to Beatrice's knitting bag. The auto-injector pen, meant to be her instant salvation, lay inside. Its safety cap had been removed, but the device was unused, bearing tiny, desperate teeth marks on the plastic casing. She knew what was happening and attempted to use it, Slack stated grimly. But the reaction was too rapid. She didn't have the time. Or perhaps, Miss Marple countered softly, the allergen was introduced so directly, so unexpectedly, that the shock paralyzed her before she could administer the dose. She pointed to the grey swatch. Mrs. Morton was a creature of routine. Like many knitters, she had the habit of moistening her yarn end with her lips when joining a new length, or to set a twist. She let the terrible implication hang in the tense air. "Consider the combination, Inspector," she insisted. Beatrice's life-threatening allergy to nuts. Her habitual, unconscious gesture of moistening the yarn with her mouth. And Mrs. Finch's generous, well-intentioned distribution of a new, easily substituted needle oil. The faint, roasted scent in the air now seemed to solidify into a hideous certainty. "I believe, Inspector," Miss Marple stated, her blue eyes piercing the last vestiges of Slack's doubt, that this tragedy was not the result of a contaminated scone, but the result of a contaminated tool. If someone knowingly replaced the harmless lanolin in that bottle with an oil derived from nuts, groundnut oil, perhaps, and Beatrice then treated her needles, she was essentially applying the poison directly to her work area. Slack recoiled, the sheer calculated malice of the method shocking his professional detachment. She poisoned her own yarn. Someone used her own habits against her. A crime perfectly tailored to the victim, Miss Marple agreed. Invisible, untraceable at the tea table, and lethal with a single, innocent movement of the lips. She scanned the still figures of the knitters. Some were openly weeping, some were frozen in shock. But Mabel Finch remained utterly, chillingly still, her silence a profound anomaly against the surrounding grief. "We must test that bottle immediately, Inspector," Miss Marple concluded. For sometimes, the most deadly venom is concealed not in a poison, but in a simple, helpful courtesy. This version tightens the prose, amplifies the sense of calculated malice, and gives Miss Marple's deductions a more pronounced focus, linking the domestic details with the forensic evidence in the classic Christie style. Chapter 4: Two Swaps. The village of St. Mary Mead awoke to a grey, sodden morning, the oppressive drizzle perfectly matching the pall of shock that had settled over the community. Inspector Slack, grim-faced, had returned to the Institute Hall with his team to conduct a forensic sweep, determined to find the invisible killer hiding within the domestic chaos. Miss Marple arrived at 9, having spent the night reconstructing the scene in her mind, a task often more illuminating than the police's literal measurements. She found Slack examining the tragic relics of the knitting session. "Inspector," she began, bypassing the usual pleasantries. "We must revisit those mystery skeins, particularly the small confusion that attended the ticket drawing." Slack, camera in hand, looked up. "The ticket muddle? I saw it as common village inefficiency." "I suspect it was quite the opposite," Miss Marple countered gently. "An inefficiency planned with deadly precision. Let us examine the tickets and the wrappers." They focused on the evidence connected to the linen yarn, package number 7. As Miss Marple smoothed the brown paper, her attention fixed on the number 7 inscribed in black ink. "Observe the slant," she instructed. A pronounced lean to the left. A left-handed script, markedly different from the tidy, right-hand hand responsible for the majority of the other numbers. "We found 2 number 7 tickets," Slack confirmed, producing the slips. "One normal, one in this unusual script." An extra ticket was clearly introduced. "And observe this," Miss Marple continued, pointing to a faint mark on the wrapper. "A trace of grease, yes, but also a pencil price notation. The style of the figures, the formation of the fraction, I have seen this precise handiwork many times." "Where, Miss Marple?" Slack demanded, his skepticism now fully replaced by urgency. "At Finch's Wool and Haberdashery," she stated. "Mabel Finch has a highly characteristic way of marking her stock. That paper, at the very least, originates from her shop. It is proof that this package was specifically handled and prepared by someone with access to her materials." Their next step was to examine the yarn itself. Miss Marple prompted Slack to compare the linen in package 7 with an untreated sample. "It feels sticky," Slack noted, rubbing the fiber. "It has been oiled." Lucy Daring admitted treating it, believing it would soften the linen. Lucy Daring herself soon appeared, her face pale with sleepless worry. Miss Marple spoke to her with calming clarity, confirming the crucial detail: Lucy had used innocent extra virgin olive oil on her yarn. "Now, the drawer, my dear," Miss Marple pressed. "Do you recall who got number 7? "Mrs. Morton drew first," Lucy recalled, concentrating fiercely. "I think she initially drew number 3. But then, after some confusion, and she was so flustered about the procedure, she ended up with number 7 and the linen. It was all a bit chaotic. A terrible picture was emerging. So, Mrs. Morton was steered away from the innocuous number 3 and towards the pre-treated linen of number 7, Miss Marple summarized. The preparation was elaborate, Slack muttered, looking between the oiled yarn and the left-handed ticket. Indeed. The first swap was the rigged ticket drawer, meticulously planned to ensure Mrs. Morton received the yarn that was already receptive to oil, whether harmless olive oil or something else. It was a crucial, necessary step. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the securely wrapped conditioner L bottle. And the second swap, Slack finished, his voice hushed with realization, was the substitution of the harmless lanolin oil in that bottle for a fatal nut oil. Knowing her habit of moistening her yarn and ensuring her working materials were primed with the allergen. The brilliance and cruelty of the scheme were breathtaking. The ordinary rituals of the St. Mary Mead Knitting Club, the drawing of lots, the sharing of helpful samples, the unconscious habit of a knitter, had been weaponized. A perfect, two-stage murder, Miss Marple concluded. One stage to prepare the delivery method, the yarn. The second stage to provide the fatal agent, the helpful oil. And the common element, Inspector, linking the rigged paper, the access to the packaging, and the provision of the fatal substance, is the shop. And the only person with such comprehensive access to those materials is Mabel Finch. Chapter 5. The Scone That Wasn't. Dr. Haydock arrived at the Institute Hall under a sunless sky, his black bag and solemn expression signifying the grim shift from village social event to police investigation. His initial report was crucial, and his diagnosis was delivered without hesitation. Classic, textbook anaphylaxis, the doctor stated, closing his notebook with a snap. The respiratory distress, the swelling, the terrifying speed, all consistent with an overwhelmingly severe nut allergy reaction. No doubt about the cause of death. Miss Marple, who had spent the morning surveying the abandoned tea table, looked up. And no secondary contributing factors, Doctor? Nothing to suggest conventional poison. None at all. Whatever struck Mrs. Morton was an allergen. The puzzle is how, given the extraordinary precautions taken with the food. Slack gestured to the flowered plate, where Hester Vale's scones now looked forlorn and unjustly accused. We have tested the refreshments. No trace of nuts in the scones, the jam, the butter, even the flour is certified clean. Dr. Haydock confirmed their diligence. Mrs. Morton's sensitivity was extreme. Yet, it appears the source was not the tea itself. The scone, if you will, was a red herring. Miss Marple approached the table, her gaze pausing on the small details. She drew attention to the cheerful yellow knitted tea cozy covering the pot. Dr. Haydock, she inquired, you noted that contact could cause a reaction, though usually less severe than ingestion. But what of contact near the mouth? Before the doctor could answer, Miss Marple gently lifted the cozy. Slack immediately noted the initials MF stitched inside. Mabel Finch, Slack murmured. Another item supplied by the thoughtful haberdasher. He also noted the dampness near the cozy spout, suggesting recent, frequent handling. Miss Marple then directed the doctor's attention to the secure bottle of Sneedle Conditioner L. You are familiar with lanolin, Doctor. What scent does this possess? Dr. Haydock unscrewed the cap and inhaled cautiously. This is not lanolin, he declared instantly. Lanolin is distinctly waxy, almost woolly. This scent is entirely different, it is decidedly nutty, pleasant but synthetic. It is an oil, but certainly not what the label claims. The second, crucial element of the crime was confirmed, the substitution. Miss Marple then linked the chain of evidence. She pointed to a stitch marker from Mabel's collection, now faintly smeared with the same oily residue found on Beatrice's fatal bamboo needles. Someone was generous with the conditioner, Miss Marple observed. And if an individual, handling that oily residue, then touched their yarn, and that yarn was habitually moistened by the knitter's lips, the allergen would be delivered directly and efficiently to the bloodstream via the oral mucous membranes, Dr. Haydock finished, his voice hushed with the horror of the clinical fact. It is an alarmingly effective means of introduction, circumventing all the usual digestive defenses. Slack looked from the clean food to the contaminated needles. The knitting supplies were the weapon. Indeed, Miss Marple confirmed. A lethal, customized delivery system. We must look not merely at who had motive, and Hazel Trent's resentment over her patent being disqualified gives her one, nor at those who appear suspicious, like Lucy daring with her olive oil experiment, but at the individual who held the requisite knowledge and complete opportunity. The true genius of the murder, Miss Marple realized, lay in its domestic camouflage. The killer had known about the victim's fatal weakness, her unconscious working habit, and the exact moment and mechanism to introduce a weapon that looked exactly like a helpful tool. The question, Miss Marple concluded, as she prepared to leave the desolate hall, is who among them possessed the necessary blend of intimacy, access to the shop's supplies, and the utter lack of conscience required to turn a small, kind gesture into a mechanism of cold-blooded murder. The solution, she felt, was now woven into the very fabric of the club's routine. All that remained was to identify 03 the wicked hand that had pulled the thread. Chapter 6: Monogram on the Bottle. The third day of the investigation dawned crisp and clear, the autumn sunlight streaming through the tall institute windows and banishing the gloom. Miss Marple arrived early, armed with a small magnifying glass and the determined expression of a craftsman about to complete a difficult repair. Inspector Slack was already there, grappling with the case's complexity. He was grateful for Miss Marple's methodical mind. The raw evidence was a muddle, pointing everywhere and nowhere. "I've been thinking about that bottle," Miss Marple announced, moving directly to the evidence table. Specifically, the label. There are details invisible under electric light that the natural sun might reveal. She positioned the brown bottle of supposed needle conditioner under the strong eastern light. Slack joined her, squinting at the white paper labeled proclaiming a needle conditioner L. At first glance, it appeared standard. "Look closely at the surface," Miss Marple directed. As his eyes adjusted, Slack saw it, a faint, ghosted texture, as if another label had been removed and the current one poorly pasted over it. "There's something underneath," he said slowly. "Phantom letters." "Precisely," Miss Marple confirmed. "And here, at the edge, you can just make out the curve of what might be a G. And there, the tail of what could be a D." She handed him her magnifying glass. Under its enhanced view, the phantom letters became distinct. The ghostly impression of ground oil was clearly visible beneath the paper. "Ground oil," Slack stated, the realization hitting him with the force of a physical blow. Someone relabeled a bottle of groundnut oil to make it appear to be harmless lanolin. And groundnut oil, Miss Marple finished quietly, is merely another name for peanut oil, precisely the substance fatal to Mrs. Morton. They turned their attention to the metal screw cap. Under the magnifying glass, Miss Marple pointed to a tiny scratch mark, a small letter M etched into the metal. "A knitting needle would make exactly that sort of mark," she observed. "It is the sort of thing a knitter might do to identify their own supplies when lending them out." Slack made notes, his gaze intense. Nearby, another stitch marker from Mabel's collection showed a distinct smear of the same suspicious oil. Whoever applied this false conditioner was not meticulous about avoiding contamination of other items, Miss Marple observed. "This stitch marker has clearly been handled by someone with oily fingers." Returning to Beatrice's abandoned swatch, Miss Marple pointed out that two particular rows showed a subtle difference in texture under the bright light. These rows appear to have been knitted with yarn that had passed through treated hands. The wool has a slight, unnatural gloss. You are building a convincing case for deliberate murder, Miss Marple, Slack conceded. But we must address the red herrings. Miss Trent's resentment. Miss Daring's misguided oil experiment. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, looking out at the peaceful village street. Indeed. Miss Trent's grievance provides a clear motive for anger. Miss Daring's olive oil use could certainly be misconstrued as intentional tampering, providing a convenient scapegoat. And then there is Mrs. Pike's silence. People often assume the quiet ones conceal the darkest grudges. Any of them could have brought oil, Slack argued, consulting his notes. Any of them had access to Mrs. Morton's needles during the confusion. True, Miss Marple agreed, turning back to the evidence table. But consider the necessary knowledge. The killer required for very specific pieces of information, all of which had to align perfectly. Beatrice's severe allergy and how it might be triggered without ingestion. Her specific, personal knitting habit of moistening the yarn ends with her lips. Access to the original bottle and the ability to substitute the groundnut oil, which the phantom label proves. The ability to move freely about the room, offering helpful supplies and assistance without raising the slightest suspicion. She picked up a mystery skein wrapper, pointing again to the unique price markings. And these markings, Inspector, the formation of the numbers, the fractional notation, they are the distinctive shorthand of Finch wool and haberdashery. The paper came from her shop. Slack looked up sharply. Access to the materials, the monogram on the cap, their helpful nature. Miss Marple gently touched the tea cozy with the HMF monogram, damp around the spout from being handled while pouring. Someone who knew the routines intimately, who could offer supplies and assistance without seeming out of place, who had both the knowledge and the opportunity to orchestrate this very clever and deeply personal murder. The sharp morning sun cast long, hard shadows across the evidence, highlighting the chilling clarity of the crime. Miss Marple felt the familiar click as the last pieces fell into place. But we must be very careful, Inspector, she cautioned. The evidence must speak for itself, and we must follow it wherever it leads, however unexpected the destination. She knew, with a certainty born of long experience in the subtleties of human wickedness, that the cozy, familiar world of St. Mary Mead had concealed a killer of extraordinary, cold-blooded intent. Chapter 7: Midnight in the Wool Shop. The hour had grown late. Miss Marple sat in her drawing-room, her knitting resting idly in her lap, the subtle wickedness of the case revolving in her mind. Despite the clear evidence of the rigged swap and the substituted oil, she felt an anxious certainty the killer would not rest while the physical proof remained accessible. Near 11 o'clock, she made a decision that spoke less of the quiet village life and more of the grim necessities of detection. A quick call to Inspector Slack dispatched Sergeant Lake to the heart of the village. Lake settled into discreet surveillance across from Finch wool and haberdashery. The cheerful display of autumnal yarns in the window seemed incongruous beneath the pale, silent moonlight. It was nearly midnight when a figure appeared at the side entrance, moving with a telltale anxiety. Lake watched as Mabel Finch let herself into her own premises, carrying a large, dark canvas sack. The constable waited, allowing the urgent, guilty task to begin. When his authoritative rap sounded on the shop door, the reverberation in the quiet street was startling. Mrs. Finch? Sergeant Lake here. I'm afraid I must ask for a moment of your time. The following silence was absolute, a frozen moment of dread. When Mabel finally opened the door, her usual polished self had dissolved. Her hair was loose, and her cardigan was dusted with fine debris. Sergeant Lake, what an astonishing hour! Just a spot of unavoidable tidying, you know. Shop work. She trailed off, her forced cheerfulness cracking. Indeed, Lake responded mildly, stepping inside. It looks as though you've been rather busy. Mind if I see the result of your late industry? The shop was dimly lit, shadows deep and concealing among the shelves of colourful wool. Lake's attention was instantly drawn to the large canvas sack, already half filled with scraps of paper and packaging material, near the rear counter. Just disposing of old stock, Mabel offered quickly, trying to shield the contents. Lake moved with quiet professionalism, approaching the sack. He found, nestled at the very bottom, a small shop waste tin. Retrieving it, he found the irrefutable evidence Miss Marple's intuition had foreseen. The tin contained a torn fragment of a commercial label bearing the partial inscription, Nut OI. More damning still was a crumpled white till receipt, perfectly legible, marked, groundnut oil, grocers, dated 3 days prior. Groundnut oil, Mrs. Finch? Lake questioned, holding the receipt up to the weak lamp. From the grocer's? That's hardly a haberdashery item. Mabel's face was utterly colourless now. One uses oil for many things, to lubricate. Her voice failed her. Lake continued his methodical search, finding shredded ticket fragments and remnants of the deliberately torn-off label. The final, damning piece was located in the back room, a shallow tray holding 2 skeins of linen yarn. One was untouched, the other was tacky and faintly aromatic, the residue of a highly specific experiment. Mrs. Finch, Lake said, his voice dropping to a low, official register. I must ask you to accompany me. Inspector Slack will have questions regarding these items. Mabel's entire facade collapsed. It wasn't supposed to happen that way, she whispered, the quiet desperation overwhelming her. I only meant it to be a warning. Just enough to stop her interfering with the fund. Lake made careful note of this admission, the motive confirmed by the immediate aftermath of the crime. The murderer, driven by guilt and panic, had provided the very proof the police needed. As Sergeant Lake escorted Mabel Finch from the shop, the moonlit village street seemed to hold its breath. The image of the kindly shop owner, renowned for her cheerfulness and helpfulness, being led away was a devastating blow to St. Mary Mead's peaceful self-image. Miss Marple, hearing the report later that night, felt the familiar mixture of vindication and profound sorrow. The human heart, she knew, was a deeply tangled skein, capable of weaving both the finest charity vests and the most terrible, cold-blooded designs. The last thread of the mystery had been pulled, and the pattern of the murder was finally complete. Chapter 8. The Burnt Label. The morning following Mabel Finch's midnight flight brought Inspector Slack back to the Institute Hall with the determined posture of a hunter closing his trap. Armed with the receipt and label fragments found in the wool shop, he now saw the crime scene not as a mystery, but as a meticulously constructed problem, ready for deconstruction. Miss Marple arrived shortly after, carrying her knitting bag less as a disguise and more as a token of quiet victory. "I trust Sergeant Lake's vigil proved fruitful," she said, without needing to ask. "It did, Miss Marple." Mrs. Finch's panicked attempt to dispose of evidence provided us with crucial pieces, including a receipt for groundnut oil purchased 3 days before the club meeting. "I suspected as much," Miss Marple nodded. "But I believe the final fragment of the puzzle might reside here, in the hall itself, regarding the destruction of that original label." She moved toward the modest kitchen area at the back, where a small, functional gas range was used for village refreshments. If someone needed to dispose of an incriminating label quickly and thoroughly, she reasoned, opening the small oven door, what better place than a convenient, hot fire? Inspector Slack joined her, noting the interior showed clear signs of recent use. Among the normal cooking residue were several small, blackened fragments that looked distinctly unlike food debris. "Burned paper," he confirmed, carefully extracting one piece with tweezers. "And look here, there's still a partial letter visible." Under his close inspection, the fragment showed the faint, ghostly remains of commercial printing. The letters Lino were just barely discernible against the charred background. "Lanolin," Miss Marple stated with quiet satisfaction. Someone incinerated the original lanolin label after peeling it from the bottle, ensuring no trace remained of its original, innocent contents. They continued searching, finding small, brittle curls of adhesive sticker material, the very sort used for product labels. The time of the burning was the only remaining question. It would have required access to the kitchen, Slack mused. But the knitting club has the run of the place for tea preparation. There was enough confusion during the drawing for someone to slip away briefly. Returning to the main hall, they re-examined the false bottle. "Look at the edges of this new label," Miss Marple pointed out. "They are remarkably sharp and clean, applied very recently, unlike the soft, worn labels on her other shop samples." She flipped the bottle over, pointing to a tiny pencil dot beneath the new label. "Here is Mrs. Finch's characteristic price marking. She has a habit of making tiny notations on her shop samples to keep track of distribution." Slack now had a comprehensive case. Mabel Finch purchased the groundnut oil, destroyed the original lanolin label, evidenced by the burnt scraps, and applied a fresh, false label to the bottle. Next, Miss Marple moved to Beatrice's preserved materials. Using a clean cloth, she gently wiped the tips of the bamboo needles. The resulting cloth carried a faint but unmistakable, nutty scent, not woolly lanolin, but roasted peanuts. "This is the yarn that Mrs. Morton handled repeatedly," Miss Marple explained, examining a contaminated section. "The yarn she would have habitually moistened with her lips. The physical evidence is absolute." Finally, Miss Marple brought out the 2 number 7 tickets. "We need to consider the left-handed writing on the duplicate ticket," she said. Slack consulted his file. "Mrs. Trent and Miss Daring are right-hand. Mrs. Pike's handwriting is unique due to her arthritis." Miss Marple delivered the final, cold fact. "Mrs. Finch is left-handed. I observed her writing in her shop ledger. The duplicate ticket, the paper from her shop, the oil substitution, the monogram, the burnt label, it all fits one hand." The systematic build-up of evidence was undeniable. The ingenious mechanism of the murder, disguised as an accidental reaction and shielded by innocent-seeming red herrings, Miss Daring's oil, Miss Trent's known resentment, was entirely the work of the left-handed shop owner. The truly clever thing, Miss Marple cautioned, was that the murder used genuine circumstances to create false suspicion. Mrs. Trent did resent Beatrice. Miss Daring did treat her yarn. These facts could have easily misled a less rigorous investigation. Slack closed his notebook with a decisive snap. The physical evidence, Miss Marple, tells the only complete story. A meticulously planned murder, disguised as an accident. As the afternoon sun began to angle through the institute windows, casting long, final shadows, Miss Marple reflected on the chilling nature of the crime. Someone had used the sanctuary of village crafts and the trust of friendship to commit murder, believing the innocent setting would provide perfect, lasting camouflage. Justice awaited its final hearing. Chapter 9: The Wrong Number. The final hours before the confrontation found Miss Marple at her desk, the blue wool jumper abandoned. She was no longer collecting facts, she was arranging them into the terrible, inevitable pattern of the crime. Inspector Slack's call had confirmed Mabel Finch's admission, the lie that it was merely a warning, but Miss Marple knew the truth was far colder and more precise. The execution was a masterpiece of domestic malice, resting on two crucial substitutions. First, the poison swap, the prior purchase of groundnut oil, proven by the receipt found in the shop's trash, and the methodical destruction of the original lanolin label, the charred fragments in the kitchen range serving as the killer's boast of thoroughness. The weapon was carefully disguised to enter the secure environment of the knitting club. Second, the targeting swap. This step required intimate, personal knowledge. Mabel had observed Lucy Daring's innocent attempt to soften her linen yarn with olive oil. Mabel immediately grasped the opportunity. The pre-treated linen yarn would be distinctive and justify further conditioning. The plan was built around Beatrice Morton's deep-seated habit of moistening her yarn ends with her lips, a common knitter's gesture that guaranteed direct entry of the allergen. The ticket swap, the wrong number, was executed with brazen confidence during the confusion of the drawing. Mabel, using her left hand, introduced the duplicate ticket, ensuring Beatrice received the fatal linen. Under the guise of helpfulness, the groundnut oil was applied to the bamboo tips, a dab to stop the squeak, turning a thoughtful gift into a mechanism of death. Within minutes, the allergy flared, swift and unstoppable. Miss Marple reflected on the killer's cynical genius. The initial suspicion fell entirely on the tea table, exactly as planned, giving the killer the critical time needed to destroy the original label and wait for the accident to be confirmed. The surrounding suspicion served only as smoke. Hazel Trent's genuine resentment and Lucy Daring's harmless experiment became the perfect red herrings, obscuring the calculated sequence of events. But the physical evidence, the groundnut oil receipt, the burnt label scraps, the distinct left-handed script on the switched ticket, all spoke the same truth. Slack's final call confirmed Mabel's full statement was forthcoming. Her motive, Miss Marple deduced, was simple: corrosive fear, the threat to her financial security posed by Beatrice's promised audit of the yarn fund. Fear can drive people to desperate measures, Miss Marple reflected, particularly when their livelihood is threatened. She returned to her knitting, her needles working the soft blue wool, saddened by the revelation that the sanctuary of the village craft club had been corrupted by such a cold, calculating intent. A life was lost, another ruined, and the quiet rhythm of St. Mary Mead irrevocably disturbed. The final act awaited, but the pattern of the murder was complete. The simple human habit had been weaponized, and the truth, though tragic, had finally emerged. Chapter 10: The Bind-Off Reveal. A subdued, grey morning ushered in the final confrontation. Miss Marple, carrying her knitting bag like a standard, entered the Institute Hall, her face reflecting the gravity of the occasion. Inspector Slack had meticulously arranged the physical evidence, the relabeled bottle, the burnt fragments from the oven, the duplicate ticket, and Beatrice Morton's contaminated yarn, a silent, damning tableau of premeditated murder. The surviving members of the knitting circle filed in, their faces etched with strain. The air was thick with expectation and dread. Last to enter was Mabel Finch, escorted by Sergeant Lake, her former cheerfulness utterly extinguished, replaced by the crushing weight of despair. Inspector Slack began, his voice formal and resolute. What appeared to be a tragic accident has proven to be a case of deliberate murder. Miss Marple then rose, holding the room's attention with her gentle but unwavering gaze. The method was both cruel and uniquely clever, she explained. It exploited the victim's extreme allergy, her trusted habits, and the atmosphere of this charity gathering. She pointed to the evidence. The murder weapon was this bottle of groundnut oil, purchased days in advance and meticulously disguised as harmless lanolin. The delivery system was Mrs. Morton's own knitting, treated with this oil under the guise of helpful maintenance. The killer relied entirely on Mrs. Morton's habit of moistening her yarn with her lips, a common practice that guaranteed instant, fatal contact. Mabel Finch lowered her head, offering no resistance to the facts. Miss Marple then detailed the cunning preparation. The true genius lay in the two swaps. First, the poison was substituted. Second, the duplicate ticket, written in the killer's distinctive left-handed script, ensured Mrs. Morton received the pre-oiled linen yarn, setting the trap. The killer used innocent actions, like Miss Daring's experiment, to create a plausible scenario for the contamination. She turned directly to the motive. The crime was rooted in financial desperation. Mrs. Morton had discovered irregularities in the knitting fund, systematic skimming of money, and planned to present a full audit. That audit meant ruin for Mrs. Finch's shop. Slack confirmed the evidence. The financial fraud has been verified through the shop's records. Mrs. Morton's suspicions were entirely justified. Mabel Finch finally raised her tear-streaked face. "I only meant to frighten her," she whispered, clinging to her fragile lie. "Just enough to make her ill, to stop the audit. I never meant for it to be fatal." A warning to someone with that level of allergy is, in effect, a sentence of death, Miss Marple stated quietly but firmly. As Mabel Finch was led away, the remaining members sat in stunned silence. The cozy world of their club was irrevocably shattered by the revelation of such precise, cold-blooded betrayal. Miss Marple offered the only path forward. "The club's funds will be recovered. You must continue Mrs. Morton's charitable work." "To think one of us could commit murder at a knitting meeting," Lady Bantry murmured, unable to comprehend the scale of the deception. Miss Marple smoothed her gloves, offering her final assessment. "Clubs, my dear, are built on trust and routine. Change one routine, and you can tie a very deadly knot indeed." The final knot of the mystery was tied, revealing the dark truth that had hidden beneath the surface of St. Mary Mead's civilized facade.